I am delighted to introduce our next keynote speaker. We had some technical difficulties earlier, and we appreciate his patience and his willingness to stay with us and make his presentation at this time. Joey Hood is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Joey Hood is has spent much of his career working in the diplomatic areas in the Middle East, and particularly on the Arabian Peninsula. He has served as Deputy Chief of Mission in Iraq and in Kuwait, as well as Consul General and Principal Officer in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Prior to these assignments, Mr. Hood was Acting Director of the Office of Iranian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. So his career has focused on many of the issues that we are focusing on in this conference, and specifically today. Mr. Hood has also served in Riyadh, where he coordinated U.S.-Saudi military cooperation, and in Asmara, where he was liaison to rebel leaders from Sudan's Darfur region. He has also been assigned to U.S. embassies in Yemen and Qatar. So you see his expertise covers different parts of the Arab world. Prior to the Foreign Service, Mr. Hood was a Fulbright Scholar in Burkina Faso and worked at a bank in Vermont. He earned a master's degree from the Fletcher School at Tufts University and a bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College. We're grateful for Joey Hood's appearance today at this conference. I know it's a busy time at the State Department, considering all the events happening in the Middle East. And now we turn the microphone on to Deputy Assistant Secretary Joey Hood.
Well, thank you, Khalil. I'm sorry for the technological issues early on. I had trouble convincing Zoom that I was not a robot, but I assure all of you I am definitely not a robot, and you won't be hearing robotic points from me this morning. In fact, I think it's great that you put me on after Dr. Mitri, because in many senses, I think you'll hear a point-counterpoint kind of dialogue between us here, because I think I disagree with almost everything he said, except for at the end when he was talking about, in response to a question, how there really isn't much of an alternative to partnerships with the United States. And I think that's right. China and Russia are out there offering their own kind of closed off, very dark visions of the future. But people of the region have proven over and over that they don't want that kind of future for themselves. They want to be able to express themselves freely. They want to be the #1 users of YouTube and social media, as they are in many countries in the Middle East. They want to express themselves creatively. They want to be able to criticize their governments and to find a better way forward. And that's exactly what they get with U.S. partnership that is centered on shared values and not on suppressing people for the benefit of repressive governments. But I'd like to begin my remarks in the broadest possible way by talking about President Biden's vision, his strategic vision, which was laid out in the interim national security strategic guidance that he gave to the U.S. government executive branch. It reorients our foreign policy to address global challenges defining our future, not the challenges of the past. And you've heard him say many times, this is why we got our military forces out of Afghanistan, because we went in there for a specific purpose. We achieved that purpose. Now it's time to move on to the challenges of the 21st century, not the 20th century. And those include not just counterterrorism, but also fighting this pandemic, building a health infrastructure that'll deal better with the next pandemic coming down the road, whenever that is, uh, and fighting climate change. This climate crisis, if not overcome by cooperation around the world, could really subsume us. And so we have to work together. And the countries of the Middle East are absolutely vital in that because of their importance to the energy markets. So that's what we're talking to our partners about, even though a lot of our interests that have guided our foreign policy over the past 75 years are still there. Dr. Mitri talked about how we don't need oil from the Middle East anymore. Well, the statistics don't bear that out. We still import 1 million barrels a day of oil products from the Gulf countries, which is about the same amount that we imported in 1986. Why? Because we need different types of oil for different things. And we can't produce everything that we need for all purposes at all times. Anybody who knows the oil industry, and I certainly do not know it that well, knows that this is true. For a long time, more than 60 years, we've had the Fifth Fleet headquartered in Bahrain. Why? To help ensure freedom of navigation for products going in and products going out. Dr. Mitri was talking about how we don't have to guarantee the security of Israel anymore. Balderdash. I mean, we are totally still committed to helping to secure Israel, and that is not going to change. So, I feel like we're just talking about two different planets here. U.S. interests in secure and stable energy markets for ourselves and for our economic partners. U.S. interests in the security of Israel are rock solid. They are not going to change. Now, our military presence will change in the region over time, as it always has. It doesn't look the same now as it did 75 years ago, or 60 years ago, or 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, when we had hundreds of thousands of soldiers and airmen and Marines and sailors in the region to lead the coalition to liberate Kuwait. We shouldn't have that same mix of people in the region now when the threats and the conditions are completely different. What we do have are small numbers of capable forces in different parts of the region, training and advising and providing intelligence cooperation and airstrikes when necessary to help our partners, such as in Northeast Syria, where we have a small military presence. It's not going to change because our interests in making sure that ISIS is fully defeated haven't changed. So that's going to remain. We're going to remain engaged with the Iraqi security forces because they want us to provide training and advising and enabling their forces to go after the remnants of ISIS in their country. This works out for all of our interests, as well as our partners in NATO and especially in Europe. So those interests are not going to change. Also, what's not going to change are our people-to-people ties. You know, over the past couple of decades, we've had more than 1.5 million students from the Middle East and North Africa countries studying in the United States. At any one time, you can have over 100,000 students from the Middle East studying in the United States. That's the size of a small city. And what do those people do? The vast majority of them don't stay here and work. They might for a short while, but the vast majority of them go back to their countries and they build their societies and their economies. They become the doctors and lawyers and engineers and other professionals that have really taken this region economically from where it was 30 years ago to now, which is far more developed than it ever was. There are people out there saying that, well, you know, you withdrew from Afghanistan, and I even heard the moderator here talking about the U.S. withdrawal, U.S. hegemony coming to an end because we've left Afghanistan militarily. And so we're going to apparently going to do the same thing in Iraq. Well, Iraq is not Afghanistan, folks. I mean, think about it. We still import oil from Iraq. Iraq is still extremely important to energy markets all around the world. It is a relatively wealthy country. It is located very close to our NATO ally, Turkey. We still have that ISIS threat that we need to continue dealing with Iraq. Otherwise, it'll destabilize our allies in Europe and elsewhere. So no, there's actually no comparison between Iraq and Afghanistan. We have major strategic interests in Iraq that we just never had in Afghanistan. We are shifting to a new phase there based on the enhanced capabilities of the Iraqi security forces and the fact that they are having more and more success against Daesh. We'll be there to support them. Meanwhile, we're going to rebuild partnerships all across the region. You know, we saw how important those partnerships can be in times of crisis in particular. There's no way that we could have evacuated more than 120,000 people from Kabul, for example, over the course of just a couple of weeks without major support from our Gulf partners. Those planes full of evacuees shuttled to bases in the Gulf and back again, and our Gulf partners welcomed them as temporary guests awaiting processing and transit to other locations. You mentioned, Khalil, also that we've seen those Gulf partners, particularly the UAE and Bahrain, take a leading role in normalizing relationships with Israel and making Israel a full player in the region's economic and security future. Any sustainable economic and security dialogue now will need to include Israel. And as we recently celebrated the one-year anniversary of the Accords, we've seen that the normalization efforts have really opened up that door. We're going to continue to help them build on those partnerships while creating opportunities to improve the lives of Israelis and Palestinians alike. That's important in its own right, but it's also a way to advance toward a negotiated two-state solution. When I listen to remarks by Dr. Mitri and others, you know, it sounds like they want us to go back to exactly the same sort of approach before to peace negotiations between the Palestinians and Israelis that didn't lead anywhere. But this is a very different region now, where we've got these normalization agreements, for example. And so we need to take advantage of that and notice and take note of that and build on those in a way that might lead us to a more successful outcome than we've had over the past 30 years. So I'll stop there by noting that my main point, as I've discussed today, that we're more committed than ever to the region. But you got to work with me here. You got to see our commitment as something beyond just the narrow security realm. It's also economic. It's also scientific. It's also health related. It's climate related. It's education. It's many, 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 many other aspects that are going to help us confront the challenges of the future and not, you know, the ghosts of challenges past. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Hood. We appreciate your remarks, and I fully agree with you that we, as a country, need honest conversations, although not necessarily with just our counterparts in the region. We need some honest conversations here. So that's why we appreciate your presence here, and I would like to convey a couple of rather tough questions that have been raised regarding your remarks. Several of them dealt with the issue that you mentioned. You kind of praised or mentioned the celebration today with the normalization process in the Middle East, and that the administration intends to build on that in reference to the Abraham Accords. However, the administration, as you did today, to your credit, you did mention that the remaining challenge is basically the Arab-Israeli or the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, which remains in need of some serious attention. Would you care? I mean, several people are alluding to that, asking if you could explain one more time. I know some new statements were issued by the spokesperson at the State Department this week. Could you explain the relationship between the two? I mean, how can you normalize away from and without the Palestine issue being at the center of this normalization process to the detriment of peace in Palestine, at the same time talk about this linkage of somehow improving the lives of both on equal terms of both Israelis and Palestinians?
Mhm. That's a very good question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address it. These normalization agreements, the Abraham Accords, and others that have come online, I think that we would consider them a failure if 10 years from now, they only resulted in rich people getting richer. Okay, just to put it bluntly. They have to help lead toward better lives for everyone. And that's why it's important to put the Palestinians and other marginalized people at the center of these agreements. So what would that look like? For example, water is a big issue all across the Middle East, but especially in that area between Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, who share these water resources. So imagine, for example, you might have a UAE-backed project with UAE financing that maybe is located in Jordan and then is able to provide safe and clean water to Palestinians and Israelis alike at a very low price. That would be something that was completely impossible 2 or 3 years ago, but is now imaginable. That's where we've got to put our efforts. Electricity, you can imagine the same thing. There's huge amounts of land that receive excellent solar coverage in Jordan that could be used for solar power generation. And then that energy could be sold to Palestinians and Israelis alike at a competitive price. And again, these things wouldn't have been possible just a short while ago. Are any of these things going to win anybody a Nobel Prize? No. But could they lead to much better conditions for people? Fewer people dying, fewer people getting sick, people having more jobs? Yes, that could be the case. And if it is, wouldn't that make peace negotiations that much easier between Israelis and Palestinians? We believe so.
You did, by the way, refer in your remarks, and several people in the audience commented on that by raising questions or comments. So I'll summarize them in this manner. You did refer to the strategic vision of the president that he advocated early, even back in the campaign, I guess, and beyond that, after coming to the White House. You referred to the using your words, challenges of the future, not going back to the issues of the past. The problem, as you well know, is history is our kind of main competitor in this particular conflict. So you can't avoid the past, particularly when our policy contributed to putting certain significant issues in the past. So when you talk about the Palestine problem, for example, and it's entering its 8th decade, and which is not accidental. And yes, efforts did fail in the past, but we were not a bystander in that failure. We contributed to it. So how do we reconcile this strategic vision of focusing forward, yet at the same time, this 800-pound gorilla is sitting on our throat, not allowing us to even speak on these issues freely, and needless to say, resolving them once and for all?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean about an 800-pound gorilla sitting on our throats,
the
not
Palestine
allowing us to
question.
speak. We can speak about it freely, of course. This isn't China yet. Uh, and we need to make sure that the region doesn't fall under that model from the People's Republic of China, because that's exactly what they would like to see, is throttled free speech. No, we should be talking about it freely and coming up with new ideas and new approaches. And I think that's what the president is trying to orient us toward, not looking at everything through the lens of 50 years ago or 20 years ago. And who would know better than him? He's been working on these issues for more than 40 years. And so I think that he's seen a lot of how we get stuck in the rut with some of our assumptions and approaches, and we need to break out of that because, unlike 30 or 40 or 25 years ago, or you pick the date, we now have a pandemic to deal with. We now have a climate crisis to deal with. But on the other side, we also have these normalization agreements, which open up doors that we couldn't even have imagined before. Not to mention also something that we couldn't really have foreseen, which is a coalition government in Israel made up of the left and the right. Who knows how to deal with that exactly? If anyone says they do, they're lying, because we've never seen anything like this before exactly. And so we need to take all of this into account, I think, as we forge a new approach, slowly but surely, toward these seemingly intractable problems. And so, when the president was talking about facing the problems of the future and not of the past, he was mainly talking about terrorism and in Afghanistan. But I think it is an approach that you can broaden to the rest of the region as well, while taking account of the fact that, yes, there has been a long history to all of these things, which are in the backs of everyone's minds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate your time, appreciate the fact that you worked hard to shuffle your schedule to be with us today. We might agree or disagree on some of these issues, but that's what America is all about. So thank you for being with us today. And we hope to continue to work with the State Department to clarify our concerns and some of these issues that are dear to basically our mission as a think tank or as a research center. Thanks again to you and to your staff. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Khalil. It was great to be with you and your members and your invited audience members. I look forward to exchanging with you again. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.